Good evening, dear viewers, and welcome back to the review program. This episode will be dedicated to the ecology sector, with more emphasis on climate finance. Let's start the analysis with defining climate finance. It refers to the money and resources provided to support activities that help address climate change. Climate financing involves funds allocated to projects and initiatives aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions, adapting to climate impacts, and promoting sustainable development. Funds come from various sources, including governments, international organizations, private sector investments, and contributions from developed countries to support developing nations.
A group of climate change organizations have
emissions of greenhouse gases.
Climate change is now happening.
Indonesia says it's
10 million tons of.
The Philippines tops a list of countries most susceptible to hazards caused by climate change.
Ito ang dahilan ng pagkakaroon ng mga bagyong gaya ng Super Typhoon Yolanda at bagyong Ondoy.
Climate finance is used to fund projects in mitigation and adaptation. Funding for adaptation builds hurricane shelters or seawalls. It restores mangrove forests and wetlands, helps manage water systems to deal with severe droughts or floods, and provides farmers with better seed and forecasts to improve their yield despite unpredictable weather. Mitigation projects reduce greenhouse gas emissions by shifting energy production towards sustainable sources. Examples of this include funding for clean public transport in cities, generating renewable energy from wind and solar power, or planting trees in deforested areas. One of the major institutions that has been significantly helping the countries to resolve environmental issues is Green Climate Fund. Established in 2010 by United Nations, this fund aims to expand human actions to respond to climate change. According to figures, so far this institution allocated $15 billion for 270 projects of 130 developing countries. In Uzbekistan, there are 5 projects by GCF amounted to almost $130 million. Let's find out about these projects. Climate change means that Uzbekistan is highly vulnerable to floods and mudslides. The most severe damage occurs in eastern flood-prone regions, particularly Andijan and Fergana. SAP 022. This project will modernize Uzbekistan's early warning system to become an impact-based multi-hazard early warning system, said to become an essential part of the country's climate risk management framework. Ultimately, this will improve monitoring networks and risk information, providing a significantly longer lead-in time to respond to disasters. The project is for 6 years from 2021 to 2027. FP 225 e-mobility program will promote a transformational shift in public transport through the provision of technical assistance and investment in climate resilient and low emission mobility systems in Armenia, Georgia, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyz Republic and Uzbekistan. In addition, the program seeks to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions amounting to about 11.4 million tons of carbon dioxide over a 25-year period. Overall, the program is expected to benefit about 3.7 million people directly and indirectly. FP 163. This program is designed to help unlock the large amounts of private finance needed to complement the limited public funding available. It will help the 7 target countries shift to low-emission sustainable development pathways and increase access to affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy. To do this, the program will support the use of technical assistance, public investments and risk mitigation instruments. Along with climate investment funds, there are also development banks that grant loans to the countries for dealing with ecological issues. One of them is Asian Development Bank. Last year, ADB's support focused on the reforms of the country's transition into a low-carbon, inclusive and market-driven economy. As of 31st December 2023, ADB has committed 254 public sector loans, grants, guarantees and technical assistance, totaling $12.4 billion for Uzbekistan. For this episode, our special guest is Mr. Warren Evans, ADB Senior Climate Envoy. Hello, Mr. Evans. Welcome to Uzbekistan.
Thank you very much.
I think it's your first visit here, yes, to Uzbekistan?
It is my first visit. I've been working in Asia for about 40 years, but this is my first time to get to Uzbekistan and very, very happy to be here.
How are your impressions about this country?
Oh, we've had, today it's been all work, but very, very positive discussions with government officials. I'm looking forward to seeing a little bit more of the country this weekend.
Did you visit the ancient spots here in Uzbekistan?
I haven't had a chance to visit anything but government officials so far.
Okay. Let's go back to times where you were a student, Mr. Evans. Bachelor, master's and PhD degrees are all on environment. So what is the main reason to choose this subject area?
Well, if we go back to those days it was a long time ago. I grew up in an agriculture area very similar to parts of Uzbekistan in Kansas in the U.S., wheat country. And when I grew up, the environment was very heavily degraded. The river in our town was heavily polluted. We had very serious flooding frequently. We were not using our water very smartly. And I saw much of our biodiversity, the natural environment being degraded. And so I decided then that that's what I wanted to work on. And I'm one of those people who's been lucky to study and work on the same agenda my entire career.
So in your career path, I have also found out that you helped the banks to establish climate investment funds. So on what sectors did these funds help the countries?
Well, that was when I was in the World Bank. The Climate Investment Funds is a partnership of all of the large multilateral development banks led by the World Bank, but including Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the Inter-American Development Bank are all partners in the Climate Investment Funds. The Climate Investment Funds, it was the first time that we had collectively a very large amount of funding. It started out a little over $6 billion of grant money and soft loan money to break new ground in areas such as renewable energy, solar energy, wind, and more recently in helping countries to transition away from coal and move into renewables. It also was the first large fund to help countries to understand the climate risks that they have and to invest in climate resilience. So it was very critical on opening the door for many of the large-scale investment programs that exist today.
So we can say they were successful in the countries, yes?
Very much so.
I just want to touch upon the mitigation projects. Some experts say that despite the benefits this project can bring, there are also some negative effects.
Well, that's true for almost any kind of development. If you don't really understand not only the benefits but also the costs in terms of risks, whether it's risk to the natural environment, risk to local communities, risk to the national economy, then you don't plan it properly. So for example, wind energy, we were all very excited about the growth of the wind sector, but there are risks, to example, for migrating birds that move through the areas that windmills are built, wind farms are built, but there are ways to mitigate that. And in fact, we're using a very innovative technology here in Uzbekistan to reduce the risk of harming migrating birds by using AI which is loaded into a camera on a tower that can actually identify birds that are coming towards the wind farm and stop the windmills that are likely to kill those birds. So there are technologies being developed to deal with this, but the most important requirement is to look at the risks early on and build mitigation measures around those risks.
So it means we can rely on modern technologies, yes?
Modern technology is definitely going to help, yes. But it's mainly a planning issue.
I have also watched one of your interviews to CNBC International TV during ADB's 57th annual meeting in Georgia. And you have mentioned the projects, initiatives on the adaptation side. And you said that there are new area that you're looking for on de-risking the investments and attracting more private sectors. So how it's going on worldwide, including Asian countries?
The largest program of that kind is called the Energy Transition Mechanism. And it is a partnership between ADB and several private sector organizations, financing organizations, as well as some bilateral donors for example, the first case, the government of Indonesia. The idea is to refinance coal-fired power plants to get concessional finance to reduce the cost of capital. By doing that, we can actually reduce the number of years that the plant operates. So in the case of our very first one in Indonesia, we will reduce the operating life by about 10 years. The amount of greenhouse gas emission avoided by doing that is massive. So if we can do this we're having discussions in several countries, starting Indonesia, but in Philippines, in Kazakhstan, Pakistan, and some other countries, the largest scale decarbonization initiative that the world's seen so far. Very, very promising, very difficult and challenging, but it's that kind of scale that we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We need a similar scale for investing in how to build resilience of vulnerable communities to climate risks. So I think an example that I used during that interview was what we call the Heat and Gender Initiative, which recognizes that the heat waves that our region are having now and have had very severe heat waves this last year, women are particularly vulnerable to those heat waves. So we need specially designed programs to reduce the risk to women during heat waves. Children and the elderly are also at risk. So we need to design programs that are tailored to meet those risks for those vulnerable populations.
So Mr. Evans, you have 40 years of experience in this area. And what I'm going to ask is, how was the situation regarding environmental challenges when you just started to work in this area, and how it is right now? Are there any positive or negative changes?
Oh, that's a very good question. They're both positive and negative. I think that certainly when I started working in Asia on environment, I started in Thailand, which had just established a new National Environment Board. In those days, it was very early stages of understanding what the environmental issues are, what are the environment policies required, introducing environmental safeguards. It was during a time that there was very rapid growth in much of Southeast Asia in particular, where much of the natural environment was being degraded very rapidly, and trying to put in place the kinds of mechanisms and policies to reduce that risk. Fast forward to about 3 years ago, fast forward to about 15 years ago. About 15 years ago, the focus shifted very much from the natural environment and environmental impacts of development to climate change. And the discussion was very much about mitigation and less about adaptation. But that was where the focus shifted in the environment world, was very much to climate change. About 3 or 4 years ago, I was very happy to see that finally we brought the natural environment and climate change together, recognizing that if we don't have healthy ecosystems, if we don't have clean air for people to breathe, then the work we're doing on climate change won't succeed. We have to bring these together. Many of the climate solutions are using nature, what we call nature-based solutions. Finally, about 4 years ago, we started bringing these two agenda items together. So now, when you go to a climate conference, they're talking about biodiversity conservation. And when you go to a biodiversity conference, they're talking about climate change. And that's what we need to do. We need to recognize that these two are inseparable. They're very interlinked, and we have to deal with them together. So I think that's a very positive outlook. Having said that, we are doing many, many things that are very positive for the environment and for climate change. Lots of success stories. But if you add it all up, we're losing the war. So we're winning some battles on this front, but if you look at it in totality, the Earth is warming faster than what anybody thought it would. The impact on resources, for example, we're here to talk about glacial melt and the future impacts on Uzbekistan of glacial melt, not only in Uzbekistan, but in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, Kyrgyz Republic. That's a long-term major challenge that unless we slow down global warming, that's going to happen. You're going to have major impacts on your agriculture, food security, and so on. So the good news is we have a lot of success stories and examples of what to do and what can be done. The bad news is we're not doing it big enough and fast enough.
Well, do you think are there any chances for human beings to win this war?
I believe that we have good chances to survive this, yes. We will, we're an innovative species, and unfortunately a lot of this is not about technology. It's not about money. It's about politics. And if the global politics can come together and actually reach an agreement that is meaningful in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions fast and providing the kind of resources required in developing countries to become more resilient to climate impacts, because we're locked in on a lot of the impacts, then I think we'll survive this in good shape. So your generation is, I have hope for your generation.
You are here to help. So Mr. Evans, let's move on to your mission in Uzbekistan. Relates to ADB proposed glaciers to farms, a regional program for Central and West Asia. And what kind of other countries are in your agenda, and what is the main purpose of this mission?
So, well, the other countries are all of your neighbor countries, and also including potentially Georgia, Armenia. So what we call our Central West region. So it's the Caucasus and Central Asia republics. The objective of this mission is really to kick this off with an initial program to develop the project, which will focus on Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyz Republic, and Azerbaijan. And the idea is to better understand the risks of glacial melt, both within the countries where the glaciers are, but also across the region. So just for example, a glacial melt in Kyrgyz Republic increases risks of landslides and local floods, and that combined with other climate impacts such as drought and heat waves can have devastating impacts locally. But initially it increases the risk of floods in Uzbekistan. It requires having early warning systems so that both Kyrgyz Republic and Uzbekistan know when there are risks and put in place measures to actually mitigate those or avoid the impacts. And these impacts are very widely seen already, and it's just going to increase. Over time, as the glaciers retreat, then you'll have less flow of steady sources of water coming into Uzbekistan. So how are you going to deal with that situation when you actually are not getting as much fresh water supply coming into the country? And that requires planning, it requires infrastructure. So the Glaciers to Farm is looking at that from the glacier down to the farm and the communities in the farming areas. Our hope is that this will dramatically increase the integration of climate risk thinking, climate risk analysis into the planning and water resource management, agriculture, community development, social protection systems. It affects almost every sector that there is, and it certainly affects a very large percentage of the poor people, the most vulnerable people in the region. We're doing the similar work in the Himalaya Hindu Kush, so in Nepal, Bhutan, and eventually in Pakistan. When you look at the total number of people that rely on the glaciers, it's about 2 billion people. So in 20 to 30 years, the water resource issue is going to become super critical. So we need to think now about how to deal with that. And that's what this program is about. Our objective is really just to start pulling together some ideas for investment programs within this initiative and reach agreement with the governments on what that would be.
So in Uzbekistan, ADB plays a crucial role in supporting the country in transitioning to green economy and addressing the climate change challenges. In your view, what do you think that how the compound climate change challenges can affect the ADB operations here in Uzbekistan?
Well, it's a combination of how can if we work with the government and prepare project investments the way we've done in the past without thinking about climate risks, then there's a very high risk that they will not succeed, because the climate change risks that are faced do affect every sector, they affect every community. So we have to turn the development planning process on its head and look at everything through a climate lens. That's what we're doing with your government now. We're initiating that process to think differently about, for example, water resources strategy, recognizing the climate risk. It's not an additionality, it's a mainstream issue. So I'm very excited. The portfolio that we have, the pipeline we have in Uzbekistan is amazing. Traditionally I think it was mainly hard infrastructure, but now we're getting much more into agriculture, water resource management, in addition to a lot of work on clean energy, renewable energy, very large scale programs on solar, on wind, on batteries that we hope will break new ground in terms of bringing private capital into the country to invest in these areas. So it's a very diverse pipeline that is largely centered around recognition that we have to look at climate impacts and opportunities in everything that we do together.
That was actually my last question. Thank you for this interview and dedicating your time for this program.
My
It was
pleasure.
a great pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. These were the main highlights of this episode. Thank you for watching. Don't miss review program every Sunday on Uzreport TV.